What you're about to hear is based on actual events. Listener discretion is advised.
It takes until the next morning for the blood of the soapmaker's victim to coagulate. Leonarda doesn't sleep long, but she does sleep, and well. She is nearly giddy with excitement, after all. What she has done can never be forgiven, sure, but she will never ask for forgiveness. What she has done is not for her, but for her son, Giuseppe. The house is spotless when she wakes, stinking like an infirmary from the bleach. Still, the smells of caustic soda, of the body rendering down to mush, lingering beneath the cleaner scents like the soft beat of a telltale heart. But it is no matter to Leonarda. She is not doing this for herself. She flips through the pages of the Red Book, passing several other recipes she may have tried, recipes for roasts, recipes for soups and stews, recipes even for soap. But there is only one she needs. She follows it to the letter, baking the blood in the oven and then milling it into flour. The resultant material is a coarse, slightly gritty meal of a rust brown sort of color, with a not unpleasant aroma. In fact, it makes Leonarda salivate in an unfamiliar way when she lets her nose linger over it. She mixes this flour with sugar, chocolate, wheat flour, milk, and eggs, then cooks the resultant mix into tea cakes. The third batch of maybe a dozen is coming out of the oven when Giuseppe knocks on the door, entering without waiting for her to answer. Later that day, he will ride for Pola with a satchel of letters to drop in a mailbox there. Things a friend needs sent, she'll tell him, while pressing a paper bag of cow bones into his arms. From soup, she'll tell him, asking him if he wouldn't mind dropping them into the river on the way. And of course, he will. He's a good boy, after all. But before he goes, he must eat. His mother eagerly offers some odd little black cakes. They smell delicious, he tells her. And as he finishes the first of many, absorbing the communion made of Ermelina Seti, Leonarda feels her heart soar with relief.
In Libya and Egypt, we're against small forces, and the bulk of the fighting is yet to begin. He knocks on the door and turns his collar up against a chill that causes him to look up and down the street instinctively. The citizenry are only just beginning to understand the paranoia of the deeper years of war, but his office has been plagued with searches and seizures. A lot of running around after subversives and college students with little printing presses in their dormitory basements. This panic call he's received about a murderer on the loose in Correggio is concerning, but in comparison to his usual business, it's more of a vacation than anything. A small break from the grind in the city. The woman who answers the door is named Valentina Fanti. He checks her paperwork and makes a note of her name before taking a seat inside her modest home. Bread is going in the oven, but the place is dark and shuttered. She has an air of fear and suspicion about her that would be at home amongst the clandestine types he's been dealing with lately. He asks her to speak, and she does. The detective is soon furiously jotting her story down in his notepad. It's her sister-in-law that Valentina's asked the detective to come hear about. But to start just with her, this won't make sense. She's disappeared, yes, and nobody can find her. This is not a big community. She did not know a lot of people. They have checked everywhere. All places save one. But first, she must tell of another missing woman, Clementina Francesca. Otherwise, as she said, this will not make sense. Francesca was a lonely soul, a widower and a school teacher who had no children of her own save those she taught numbers and letters to over the years. Life was never on Francesca's side, and though she didn't have much, she remained a generous and open person. Those few who knew her liked her, and had come to expect nothing exciting or worth gossiping about from Clementine Francesca. That is why the neighborhood found it so surprising when she started behaving as if God had reached down and put a string between her shoulders. She bounced from place to place as though he was plucking that string to help her along. Again, she was not a woman of wealthy means, but she began giving away little possessions here and there, things too expensive to simply part with that she pushed into friends' hands, insisting they were gifts. She disappeared soon after this strange behavior began, just gone. No word, no goodbyes that made any sort of sense. Close friends told of a new job somewhere in the north. A girls' school required a teacher, and she'd been hired on recommendation by a close confidant, a local tarot reader and fortune teller. Valentina stops here and the detective looks up. She's peering suspiciously around the room as if they are no longer alone. "Who is it?" Detective Sorreo asks. "Who are you so afraid of?" When the name finally comes, he swears the dark room grows somehow darker, as if it's now scowling. Valentina leans forward and whispers the name. "Leonarda Cianciulli." Now, about Valentina's sister-in-law. She was a beautiful singer, the neighborhood's biggest little celebrity. She was a soprano in her youth and even sung at the Scala, though that was some time ago. She was 53 the day Valentina last saw her. Fame lingered on her like a perfume. She was wonderful to be around, a good friend to most who knew her, but she still carried that air of celebrity wherever she went, though it had begun to fade in these later years of her life. She would tell stories of her time on stage at this or that theater, the men she caroused with, the woman who had plotted against her out of jealousy. Many of the stories were surely made up, but still she told them. They all enjoyed getting her going, for sure, but these last few years she would get this wistful look in her eyes. She wanted what any aging woman, any aging person, really, wants. To be young again, and run in those fast circles of her youth. So it wasn't that strange, they thought, when she started going out and buying new dresses, when she started purchasing new makeup and getting her hair done. She was a large, voluptuous woman, and she began to joke and fantasize of dancing and carousing with men half her age. It was only Valentina she finally confided in, the day she disappeared. She told of the tarot woman, Leonarda, having a connection in Firenze, a man who ran a small theater and required entertainers of some sort. She said this man would hire anyone on her recommendation, and that she foresaw a bright future for her. Then Leonarda swore her to secrecy, claiming that her fortune depended upon it. Valentina believed it was some gamut to defraud her sister-in-law of her money, so she followed her that day, all the way to Leonarda's house. Again the room seems to darken. The detective can barely see his notes. He requests to have a cigaretta, and that she light a candle. Valentina fetches him an ashtray and opens the shutter, but the light fails to enter. The window may as well be a painting of a dreary afternoon. She lights a candle, and he sparks his cigar, and the two of them sit silently for a moment. It feels to Detective Sorreo that he's been in this hovel for days. Maybe he should just go. He shakes the strange, heavy thought, takes a deep drag, and asks Valentina to tell whatever it is that he truly must know. Her sister-in-law went inside the fortune woman's home, and that's the last Valentina saw of her. She watched the door from the street, as it's the only way in and out of that house. She watched for an hour and 40 minutes, maybe 2 hours, but she never came out. Nobody did, except eventually Leonarda herself, in a hurry with a sheaf of odd papers clutched in her hand. Valentina decided to approach and see inside the open door then. What she saw was a great, ugly cauldron bubbling on the stove, belching this reeking white steam out into the street. It smelled like a rendering vat of a slaughterhouse, candlelight seems to reach up, and the detective's notes are suddenly ablaze. He rushes at the front door and into the street, waving the papers, then tossing them onto the ground where he stomps them out. Vaffanculo! Valentina stands at the doorway. She seems refreshed, unburdened. The room behind her is bright and inviting, though it's now raining outside. Would the detective like some bread before he goes? The detective follows a trail of money throughout Correggio and places further. He believes Valentina's story about her sister-in-law and the other woman. A little digging reveals others possess similar suspicious attitudes towards the friendly little fortune teller. But they can offer little more in the way of evidence than gossip, and nasty gossip at that. There seem to be no hard facts in the case. He follows up on the addresses the women gave in their letters to places that either don't exist or that have never heard of these women. Of the women themselves, there is never a single piece of evidence as to where they are. It's all very suspicious, but he finds nothing more solid than rumor and hearsay. He visits Leonarda soon after the interview with Valentina, going so far as to try to shake the woman with threats, but she shrugs off his suggestions and insinuations. All the while, she plays the perfect little Italian grandmother, bustling about her kitchen and cooking this and that. She even offers to read tarot for him, with a wry smile in her eye, but he declines. They have little black tea cakes and coffee while she tells him about her burgeoning soap business. She's been making her own, she says, and that's the reason for the big, reeking pot on the stove. She shoves a bar of the soap in his hands before he goes, telling him she has plenty more, and he takes it home. To his surprise, his wife loves the fragrant little bar, and it ends up in their shower, disappearing bath by bath until he's completely forgotten about it a year later, that next summer, when the first big break in the case comes. A certain priest in Correggio, in Leonarda's parish specifically, is arrested trying to cash several bonds in a local bank. One of these belongs to a missing woman, Virginia Cacciope, and so the priest is brought in for questioning. He tells the police he got the bond from a man named Spinabelli in payment for a debt. And Spinabelli? He got it from Leonarda Cianciulli. Leonarda isn't surprised to see Detective Sorreo again. She lets him through her front door, along with the host of officers he brings along with him, and apologizes that she's all out of tea cakes this time. He smiles ruefully at her, and the officers tear her apartment to pieces, looking for evidence. They drag all the kitchen implements here and there to make way for the search, and Sorreo spots an interesting red book on the shelf above the stove. Leonarda seems shocked when he opens it, but there's nothing written inside but a series of odd black squiggles. Nothing at all, really. He holds it up where she can see and asks her what it is. She shrugs, and he shakes his head, reminding her that there are serious consequences for what she's done. She asks what that is exactly that she's done, and he shakes his head again and tosses the book inside the cook pot. 10 or so minutes of searching turn up dentures and other small human remains that Sorreo puts in front of her. It's not until then that Leonarda finally shrugs and admits that she's killed some of her friends, and eaten them as well. But her confession lacks zeal, any sort of detail other than what she feeds him to get him to leave her alone. It's not until he threatens her son that she speaks the entire truth. Sorreo suggests it's not possible for a woman like her to have killed her friends, butchered them, and then dropped them into a pot like that alone. He adds it's not likely that the priest or Spinabelli helped her with any of that either. They seemed ignorant of the greater crimes committed by Leonarda. They had confessed everything they knew, in fact, and all that amounted to was hiding ill-gotten goods at the church on Leonarda's behalf. No, he tells her. It must have been your boy, Giuseppe, who shed all this blood. Her eyes narrow to slits as she rests her weathered palm on the table. I did all of it, without his help, Leonarda admits. She sounds tired. I killed all 3 of my friends and ate them. I did have some help with this, though not the kind you suspect. Faustina was the first, and then Francesca. I feel bad about them. And Virginia, who was last, but it had to be done. The communion required 3. The what? He asks. But she continues as though he hadn't interrupted. She gives every detail of the story, top to bottom, and he is nearly sick through most of it. How she butchered them, how she rendered them to nothing and put them down the sewers of Correggio. But she saves the worst for last. Their blood I turned into flour, which I made into cakes. You remember the little black tea cakes you had when you came last to visit, don't you, detective? He jumps up from the table and puts a hand to his mouth. The acid taste of vomit burns in the back of his throat. There are tears in his eyes. Virginia was the last, and very fat. She had good fat. Very good. If your hands feel dirty, detective, I'm sure you can use some of that soap I gave you to clean them.
The war rages on, and Leonarda's trial is postponed multiple times, as the prosecution attempts to wrap their heads around the strange case. Her wonderful boy, her son, Giuseppe, spends the entirety of the fighting behind bars. 2 days before Hitler is said to have eaten his pistol, Mussolini is finished off by a firing squad, but not before countless soldiers are turned to dust, and misery spreads like a plague all throughout Italy. In Correggio, there is sorrow and sadness. Many of those who testify against the so-called soap maker have their lives ripped into pieces again and again by the war. Leonarda often finds herself reminiscing of the communion they took from her, the sweet black wafers which spread the poison of her mother's curse out and away into the city. The authorities attempt to pin the murders on Giuseppe a number of times, but they don't know that Leonarda's boy has yet to even hurt a fly. Eventually, the court decides to put their quarry on the spot. Strings are pulled and stretched, then broken, culminating in the jury and accused being escorted to a morgue in the city, where they plan to have Leonarda butcher a cadaver with an axe, giving her an hour and 40 minutes to do so. This is the best timeline they've established for the murders, and it's decided that if the accused can't break down the corpse before then, it will be clear that she did not work alone. Leonarda cleaves the body into 9 pieces in just 12 minutes. Giuseppe spends 5 years behind bars, enough to wait out the entirety of the war and the short upheaval that follows. He is acquitted, then released after the performance in the morgue, and writes his mother consistently until the end of her life. It is a life she waits out as an inmate of an asylum in Pozzuoli, which ironically sits in a volcanic caldera, a cauldron, the smell of sulfur often finding her nose, while locked in her tiny room with a view of the sea, and reminding her of the deal she made with Diavolo. Some of the time she spends thinking of her mother, of how she would gloat if ever given the chance, though Leonarda understands that there is only one more stop on her life's journey. The soap maker is fine with that. It's almost certainty that she'll meet her mother again in hell. Once in a while, she recalls the little red recipe book picked off the black cobbles of fascist Correggio, and all of the other recipes held within. She thinks of how it seemed to disappear in the bottom of the cauldron Detective Sarayo threw it into. A cauldron which is now tucked away in some morbid museum. Most of all, she thinks of who might have it now, and what they might be cooking.
Monstruo is an Incongruity Media production. If you've enjoyed this experience, please subscribe and leave a positive review. You can find out more by searching for Monstruo Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit us at monstruopodcast.com. This show is produced, hosted, and written by Jack Luna and Mike Boudet. Additional writing by Tyler Bell and Evan Ziegelman. Research by Hagar Barak. Sound design and editing by Jonathan McMichael and Robert Ravelli. Original score by Leon Rogers. Art by Denny Ray.